Crackdown 3 was released this week after a very long time in development, and unfortunately it's been getting some poor to middling reviews. And this is quite a shame considering the legacy of the original Crackdown, being one of the first games to not only become almost a benchmark for the genre, but also giving us a really engaging progression curve. But Crackdown 2 failed to grow on things, and it sounds like 3 did the same thing. But this is just a long line of some critical design mistakes that we see in Crackdown 3 that could also be extended to Agents of Mayhem, and to some extent, sadly, Saints Row 4. And that's going to be our discussion for today. The open world genre has certainly become popular over the last decade as game engines and technologies have evolved to a point where you can create a huge game space and let players just run around in it. Some of the big name examples, of course, would be everything from Hulk Ultimate Destruction, Spider-Man 2, Prototype, one of everybody's favorite, the Just Cause series, and many more. But typically when it comes to the open world genre, there are two distinct varieties. There are those where you start out pretty much capable in everything, and you may get a little bit better here and there, but it's not like you're becoming God mode. Some examples of this would be Breath of the Wild, Grand Theft Auto, and even Just Cause in some extent, because even at the end of Just Cause, Rico is not going to be taking tank shells like a boss. Although maybe he does that in Just Cause 4, I haven't played that one yet. The other extreme of the open world progression is that you start out either okay or good, and then you're just going to become ultimately badass by the end of the experience. Again, the Saints Row franchise is a great example of that. Crackdown, again, Prototype, and even stuff like Spider-Man 2, or the Spider-Man open world games. But regardless of that, there's two big areas that we see a lot of open world design games tend to mess up on, and it sounds like it's the same thing that's happening with Crackdown 3. We're going to talk about the first one now, and then we'll switch to some game footage of a title that has done things right. So, the first point is the environment. And this is a very hard thing to do. And that is, the environment needs to, in some sense, infer or take into account the player's abilities or actions. In other words, how you develop the game space should allow the player to take full advantage of their own abilities in terms of interacting with it. This is what the original Crackdown did so well. As the player grew in terms of their skills, it allowed them to basically move around or do more things at a better rate in the game space. If I become a better driver, it means I can drive faster cars, I can do crazier things on the roads, I can explore things like that better. If I improve my agility, then I can start climbing up buildings faster. I can do all that crazy jumping and all other a matter of weird agility challenges. But the point is that the environment itself has to be set up to take account for that. Again, going back to the original Crackdown, what they did was you had the three different sectors that you would explore. As you got further through the game, the various cityscapes would grow higher. This did two things. One, it allowed you to really see that growth in the earlier sections. And two, it allowed you to keep being challenged by the mobility as you got further in. Breath of the Wild is another great example. The game makes use of a lot of those towers, not only for the warp points or the waypoints, but to allow you to make use of that glider. Mad Max being another point. If you're going to have, post-apocalyptic muscle cars fighting each other, well, a desert wasteland is a pretty good background to blow people up like that. And even Just Cause, despite Rico's amazing agility with his grapple and that never-ending parachute ability, you still have a variety of environments, from the snow to mountains, oceans, and so on, which you can then either use your power glide to get through, or just steal a vehicle and fly, drive, or sail your way across the world. But the point is that the environment has to have its own sense of personality and challenge the player. If you don't do that, then you could just literally replace the game space with rectangles and squares, and probably the player wouldn't notice. And this is a big problem that Crackdown 3 seems to have, and the same thing goes for Saints Row 4 and Agents of Mayhem. That the player becomes so powerful fast that the rest of the environment just doesn't really make sense to have anymore. And you'll see this in both Agents of Mayhem and Saints Row, where driving just became dull. Why should I drive around your city when I can literally super jump from one end of the city to the next? And that's not hyperbole either. When you get fully jump upgrades in, I think it was Saints Row 4, you get the super jump, you get multiple dashes, and as long as you hit a surface, either through landing or wall jumping, you can continue doing that. And in many cases, you will never see the street level of Saints Row 4 ever again once you get those upgrades. And while that sounds amazing and cool, it runs again into that big problem. What's the point of the city at that state? If I'm so powerful and there's nothing I can do to get around it, why should it even be there? And this is why Spider-Man for PS4 works so well. You have a superhero whose main form of transportation is to basically tether to very tall structures. So, what's a good city for that? Why not New York City? And you also get the added benefit with New York of, again, being a named and obviously a real place that you can throw in landmarks and make it be as realistic as possible. This is a big point about why Assassin's Creed in the last few games have done such a great job of bringing players in. They simulate such a huge amount of real estate of ancient Egypt, ancient Greece, that it becomes almost its own historical lesson for players to go around and find stuff to do in there. And there is always things to do and keep growing in those titles. But with that said, we're going to talk about the other aspect that these games tend to fail on, and that is providing a meaningful challenge alongside the power curve. But we'll switch to some game footage for that, and before we do, as always, here's a quick shout out to our Patreon backers. Thank you to our Patreon backers, and if you'd like to continue this discussion on game design, check out our Discord channel, linked down below. With the Assassin's Creed games, Ubisoft has done a really great job of providing meaningful progression, and more importantly, keeping the player growing over the course of how many hours it takes them to play the game. And this is the other side of the open world design that Crackdown 3 seems to have messed up on, and again, what a lot of developers sometimes forget. And that is, as the player grows in power, the world needs to grow with it to accommodate for that increase in power. As we said in the last part, a major element of Crackdown and Saints Row is becoming so powerful that nothing can really stop you. And while that certainly sounds like it's an amazing thing and perfect game design, it does create a serious problem. When there is nothing left to challenge the player, what is the point of even playing the game anymore? And that doesn't just go for combat, that goes for all aspects. If I'm so powerful that I don't need to level up anymore, why should I do any side quests? If I don't need to do any side quests, what's the point of exploring? If I can just jump into any mission, kill everything in a few hits, why should I even care about advanced gameplay? And you can see how things kind of spiral downward from there. And with Assassin's Creed, with the recent examples, what they've done to compensate for that is to make use of leveling and abstracted progression. Enemies have their own level to them. And if I'm not strong enough to deal with them, well, then I'm going to have to come back and grow before we can do that. And then you also have the additional skills and the talent trees. With that said, longtime fans of Game Wisdom know that I'm not a fan of abstracted progression, kind of dictating survival. I like games that let you grow in power and then basically let you do more cool stuff and then do even more than that. But saying that a guy is better than me just because of he's 10 levels above and nothing else doesn't necessarily work for me. But it is still a very effective progression model. But the point is that with the Assassin's Creed games, that the world grows more dangerous to accommodate the player's own power. Now, this is an issue that Ubisoft has actually ran into with the Far Cry games. That you'll find that the player is very weak at the start, get a few powers, and then you are just death incarnate. And again, it's very hard to keep growing the world to match. As we said in the last part, Crackdown did a good job of this with the agility orbs, and that was one of the best examples. The agility orbs provided a challenge for the player to go for, and they were rewarded with being able to do more. But then, conversely, the world itself started to grow taller or higher up to accommodate those challenges. So while the player could certainly feel like a big shot in the first section, they still had to think and be aware about what's going on in the tallest part of the game. And even if you grew super powerful with all those lovely skills for kills, you still had to kind of work to beat that final level or that final takedown when you were playing on the hard difficulty. But again, the issue that Crackdown 3 and the other open world titles run into is that when you are all powerful, what is the point of playing the game? What's left to do? And it's not even a case of something like in the Mario titles, where expert players have those super hard challenges. There's nothing in these games. And it is such a shame when that happens because you're essentially all dressed up and nowhere to go. Now, with that said though, you want to be careful about making the world too rigid to match the player's abilities. We saw this with the Elder Scrolls Oblivion, and how the level scaling was so extreme that unless you were always having the best gear at your time, you were going to run into a situation where the enemies would just outlevel you or outpower you, and there's nothing more you could do. And again, that is the danger of having abstraction or abstracted progression being the major form of progression. Now, for people who've played Assassin's Creed Odyssey and, oh man, I've already forgotten the name of it, Origins, there you go. What did you make of the abstract progression? Did it work for you, or would you prefer more things to test the player's gameplay skills rather than their RPG layer? But with that said, we're going to begin to wrap things up here. So when it comes to good open world design, the two key aspects are that the world needs to be designed to take advantage of the gameplay. If you're going to be making use of stealth, then you want a lot of walls and having vertical or basically having elevation matter. If you're going to be making use of movement tech, whether it's swinging, wall jumps, wall runs, anything that involves walls essentially, then you want the world to accommodate for that and reward the player. Right here in the footage that you're seeing, I am doing my best rock climbing or mountain climbing expertise to get around and assault this outpost or explore. And that's a big point. In the Mad Max, for instance, you have your driving, be able to upgrade your car and do more with exploration. With that said though, Mad Max wasn't a strong example because you eventually did hit that point of being overpowered and nothing could stop you. But the other aspect of open world design is that as the player grows more powerful, the world needs to reflect that. Whether it's by giving the player more challenges, allowing them to do more in it, but there has to be essentially something to make use of the player's powers. And if you can't do that, then I would not recommend putting in literally overpowered abilities. Again, in Saints Row 4, you eventually got those upgrades, like those very expensive ones that just basically let you see everything on the map, lets all your weapons almost kill everybody in one hit, almost infinite superpowers, stuff like that. And while that sounds great, you don't want to try and balance the game on top of those abilities. And It's very hard, I think, for a lot of developers to realize that. That at the end of the day, while the player wants to be a badass, the only way to test that is to provide a challenge that's worthy of it. And if you just let them turn on the metaphorical cheat mode or god mode, it doesn't make the game more interesting, it just makes it more repetitive and dull to play. But with that said, we're going to wrap up today's critical thought here. Thanks so much for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments below. If you suggest a topic for a future piece, feel free. But otherwise, come back for daily discussions on game design here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. If you're looking for another book about game design, be sure to check out my first title, 20 Essential Games to Study, out now. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoy things, be sure to do all the liking and subscribing that the kids are doing these days. Check out our Discord channel linked down below where we hang out and chat game design, and come back later tonight for our regular streamings. But that's it, and tune in for more great content here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games.